Two of my pet hates are people who make videos about Australia when they've never been here, and people who make videos about stereotypes about Australia when they know absolutely nothing. This video tackles both those. So let's jump in and have a look. I have edited out the 2-minute long introduction at the start of this video so we can launch straight into what they think are the 10 reasons not to move to Australia.
Only 25.5 million people actually live here, and less than 100,000 of those are US expats.
Wait, there must be a reason only 1 to 4,000 new Americans immigrate here each year, right?
Well, maybe you'll find out in my top 10 reasons not to move to Australia. Number 10. It gets hot. Contrary to popular belief, most of Australia isn't all perfect year-round temperatures. Well, unless you're in Sydney or Perth, but even those get some bad days each year. And although a few cities on the southern coast and Tasmania actually get hit by really cold fronts coming up from Antarctica, the real issue in most of Australia is the heat.
Okay, let's start with Sydney and Perth having perfect all-round temperatures. Ha! That's a joke. Sydney and Perth get winter also. They get rain. They get cold weather. They get the variations that come with the seasons. And certainly you would not consider it to be overly warm for several months of the year in both those states. And now, come on. The places that get super hot, like Northern Territory and Northern Queensland, the worst of that is over the summer. In the winter months, they become quite bearable. As for the other places, well, right now I'm in the middle of Victoria. I'm not on the coast. And we're aiming for a top temperature of 15 degrees. I would hardly consider that as being hot.
There is a reason nearly 90% of Australians live within 50 kilometers of the coast. The heat makes the rest of the country basically unlivable, especially in the outback where temperatures can reach 50 degrees Celsius. That's 122 Fahrenheit. Heck, it gets so hot in the desert here that the opal miners back in the day ended up building an underground settlement called Cooper Pedy to protect them from the heat.
Spoken like an ignoramus, it's Cooper Pedy. There's no P. It's not Cooper, but Cooper.
It's pretty cool, actually. And even though the cooling effects of the ocean make the coastal areas more livable, most of the cities will still get days above 40 degrees Celsius during the summer.
Come on, get real. You may get one 40-degree heat day down in Melbourne. In Tassie, you may see that maybe once every 10 years. Sydney, still a rarity. And I know that's just talking about the cities, but that seems to be what they are interested in talking about. I'd like to hear from people from other states to say how often their capital cities, because that seems to be what he's interested in, top that 40-degree temperature. Because I'm pretty certain that South Australia doesn't get it very often either.
Add in some of the most beautiful beaches in the world with tons of sunny days to enjoy, and the fact that you're pretty darn close to the equator, and it isn't hard to see why 2/3 of Australians are diagnosed with skin cancer by the age of 70.
Let's talk about public awareness. Just coming to Australia and living in Australia doesn't mean that you are going to get skin cancer like there's something in the air. If you come to Australia, then you need to learn to slip, slop, slap. It's something that we've learnt to do because otherwise we do get horribly burnt and we do risk skin cancer. It's a pretty poor thing to say that this is a reason not to move to Australia.
Oh, and I'd be remiss to not talk about that other thing the heat and sun cause as well. Bushfires. You've probably already heard about the wildfires that have decimated 46 million acres and killed 451 people this past year alone. But sadly, it's not the first, and it definitely won't be the last.
Well, here's the thing. I'm Australian and I've not heard of a bushfire that's killed 450 something people alone. The worst bushfire we've had was the 2009 Black Saturday fires, which was in Victoria, and that was 173 deaths. That falls far short of these 450 that he's talking about. When I went to look up and see what the heck he was talking about and try and figure out if maybe I'd been missing something crucial in Australian history, I did find an article that talks about some sort of analysis that was done, and it commented on bushfires from, I think, 2020, and that there had been 34 lives lost. And this analysis, with no talk of how this was done or where this came from or anything like that, but this article claimed that an analysis said that the longer term loss of lives as a consequence of these fires would be 417 people, and I don't know what that is. But unless you can show me the solid scientific research and evidence to prove this, then sod off. Now, while we're talking about wildfires, let's have a look at the wildfires that happen in America. It's not something that is unique to Australia. And of course, given that most migrants seem to prefer to move to capital cities, the chances of being caught in a wildfire in a capital city are pretty damn minuscule.
Number 9. It's isolated. You might have wondered why so many Australians have left their beautiful homeland that seems a lot like paradise to most Americans. But the reality is that many Aussies feel trapped, lonely, and isolated from the rest of the world.
Well, that's definitely one that he pulled out of his ass, because I don't know anyone in Australia, out of all the people that I know, who would say that. Most of us are pretty damn glad that we live in this beautiful country that is a little bit further away from some of the huger populations, because it does mean that there are limitations on migration. We don't have so much of a problem with illegal immigrants because we don't have a border where people can just waltz across.
And while you may think that's silly, since you can just hop on a plane and fly to a nearby country like Indonesia or Singapore, it actually isn't so simple. Most Australians live in the southeastern part of the country, so a flight to anywhere other than New Zealand means crossing the giant continent of Australia and then some, or just the entire Pacific Ocean. Basically, even those close countries end up being anywhere from a 6 to 10 hour flight away. It's at least a 14-hour flight if you're going to the US. And you should expect to spend over 24 hours in airplanes and airports if you want to visit anywhere in Europe.
I love how he really emphasises the fact about how far it is to fly to America, because Australians don't consider America as being number one holiday destination. Maybe some people do, but we see so many different destinations around the world that appeal to different types of people. And so you're saying that on the off chance that you might decide to take that one overseas holiday that's, some distance away, not New Zealand, that you shouldn't move to Australia. Because while I have some family members who do take overseas holidays every couple of years, it's just kind of par for the course. If you enjoy travel, then you accept that you're going to sit on a plane for 14 hours. That's hardly a reason to not move to a country.
And before you comment,
So what if other countries are far away? Australia's huge. Just explore that.
well, the thing about that is that Australia isn't just isolated from other countries. The cities here are actually really isolated from each other. The land down under is the third least densely populated country in the world, with just 3 people per square kilometer, and it only has 5 real cities with metro populations over 1 million residents. So, as I'm sure you can guess, the population centers are very spread out, and most of Australia is very remote. For example, the 2 closest big cities would be Sydney and Melbourne, but they're still an 8.5-hour drive apart. Melbourne to Brisbane's an 18-hour drive, Adelaide to Darwin's a 31-hour drive, and Sydney to Perth is a 41-hour non-stop trek with pretty much nothing in between.
Well, that is worthy of a bullshit. You've got so many places to stop in between the various capital cities. And they're not the be-all and end-all of the population. You just have to look at the East Coast, just for starters. And you can drive from Melbourne to Sydney and make it a day where you only travel 2 hours. And you're going to find a population centre where you can stop and stay for a day or two. There is not this big isolated gap in between capital cities where there's no population. What a load of crap.
Number 8. Time zones. Speaking of isolation, Australia isn't just physically isolated from other countries. You're also going to have trouble keeping in touch with your family or friends back home unless they live somewhere in Asia. Australia is an entire Pacific Ocean away from the US and 2 continents length away from Europe, so the time zones are practically exact opposites. Now, Australia has 3 main time zones, but for the sake of just showing how different the times are, when it's 7 a.m. in Sydney, it's 10 p.m. in London, and when it's 6 a.m. in Perth, it'd be 6 p.m. in New York. I get that this is just more of an inconvenience than a huge deal, but it can get pretty tedious trying to schedule a call with your international family and friends.
I find that to be pretty erroneous also. I have friends in the UK, I have friends in the USA, and I have voice chats with some of my USA friends on occasions, at times when we're both awake, well, duh. And really, I mean, with America, quite often I'll get up of a morning and I'll chat online with American friends. So saying that you can't do it because of the time difference is wrong. There are periods of the day when you are both awake, and it's just about juggling your timetable. It's not an impossibility, it's only something that's difficult if you make it difficult.
Number 7. The internet sucks. If you finally do manage to get a hold of your family and friends, time zones might not be the only thing that get in the way. Because even if you schedule that Zoom call perfectly, the internet might just randomly cut out or start lagging, and by the time it's fixed, it's probably the other person's bedtime. Sure, the United States isn't anywhere near the best when it comes to internet speeds compared to most developed countries, but it's light speed compared to Australia, which is only ranked as the 43rd best country for internet. And no, I don't just mean that on average it has relatively slow download and upload speeds. I mean the most expensive plans still disconnect or lag frequently, and a lot of the plans actually have data caps. Who does that anymore? A 200 gigabyte a month plan in Brisbane with download speeds only up to 12 megabits per second will cost you $65 a month. And don't even think about going over, or you'll have to pay an outrageous fee, and your internet speeds will slow down to 256 kilobytes per second. What developed nation has any internet speeds under 1 megabit per second? That's just ridiculous.
Okay, I will give him the one on the data cap. It is frustrating when you run out of data and you do have to pay a fairly exorbitant amount for excess data. But I'm curious because everything I have runs through iOS, and I use Audi Mobile. So even with my laptop, I just do it through Audi Mobile. But I don't have issues with my internet dropping out. I don't have issues with slowness of like downloads or stuff like that, or any of that sort of things. So I'm just wondering what other people's experiences are. This comment that we have really slow internet speed, to me, I don't see it actually affecting anything that I do. So is it just that we have slower speed, but it doesn't matter because it still does the job? I'm confused.
Number 6. Everything wants to kill you. If the frustratingly slow internet speeds are enough to make you want to go on a digital cleanse and take a camping trip out in the wilderness, well, don't, because literally everything here is trying to kill you. Yeah, Australia's home to box jellyfish, stonefish, tons of poisonous snakes and spiders, blue-ringed octopuses, stingrays, sharks, and the largest saltwater crocodiles in the world.
Geez, do I even need to comment on this? Who else gets so fed up with hearing this thing about everything in Australia wants to kill you? Of all those things he listed, the only things I've encountered are venomous spiders and venomous snakes. And most of the time, provided you can get treatment, well, with snakes that are venomous, yes, some of them can kill you if you don't get treatment in time, but there is anti-venom. Venomous spiders, they might make you a bit sick. That's the worst of it. But honestly, these are things that you don't encounter in everyday life. And like I said, most Americans are going to move to capital cities because that's what they seem to think is all there is in Australia. I promise you, if you move to Sydney, you're never going to meet a crocodile.
Wait, did you think I was done? No, I'm just getting started. Because kangaroos, dingoes, cassowaries, emus, cone shells, and drop bears can all pose serious threats. Okay, well, maybe not the drop bears since they don't actually exist, but the rest of those animals have all taken human lives.
What is a cone shell? And how can a shell take someone's life, for starters? And let's talk about all the other things. Emus and kangaroos and cassowaries. I'm pretty certain that if there are actual instances of these having killed people, that it has been because some dumbass has done something really, really stupid and brought it on themselves, because these are not animals that go out of their way to attack people. These are pretty docile creatures. So, what the...
Australia just isn't a place where you can spontaneously go for a hike or swim without being very cautious of your surroundings at all times. Heck, there's a story of a man being snatched out of his boat in a river by a giant crocodile while he was just going fishing with his family.
Lots of Australians go bushwalking, and they know what precautions to take. If you're going to go bushwalking, you wear heavy boots so that you don't end up getting bitten on the foot by a snake or a bull ant or something. It's simple. Respect the environment, follow the signage, take sensible precautions.
Although don't get too worried, because you're actually more likely to die by falling off a horse than from one of the deadly critters here. Just be careful and respect the animals whose homes you're visiting. Except for kangaroos. While you might think they're so cute and cuddly, they can be vicious, and many Australians actually see them as pests. The only reason the country hasn't declared war on them yet is because the kangaroos outnumber Australians 2-1, and the Aussies don't want a repeat of what happened in the Great Emu War of 1932. Spoiler alert, the emus won.
Far out. Where do you start with all this? Okay, first of all, yes, the kangaroo population is greater than the human population. But that said, where a lot of kangaroos live are away from the densely populated areas. Some farmers do see kangaroos as being a nuisance, and there are laws which allow for culling of roos if the population does become too large and too unmanageable. And that goes two ways. That means that the surviving roos still have adequate feed, while at the same time crops aren't being destroyed. Now, can we please address this emu war thing? It wasn't a freaking war. All it was a culling operation. They used Australian military to do it because they know how to shoot guns. The idea was to diminish the number of emus because it was becoming problematic. And they're saying that the emus won the war. It wasn't a war. It was called off because it was not being successful. No people died in it. Emus weren't fighting back. Emus were being shot just to reduce the population numbers down to a level where they weren't completely destroying crops and where they could be self-sufficient on bushland. So we're 20 minutes in and I've only addressed 5 of the 10 points. So I'm going to wrap this video up here and make a part 2. Also, I think there was so much in this one that some of us need a chance to breathe and bring our blood pressure levels back down again before tackling the second half of this video. So let me know what you think about what's been said so far in this video. If you're not already subscribed, please subscribe, please hit the like button, and yeah, leave a comment below.